Hello, everyone. So, today I will be teaching Wallace some of the things that we are learning about in class. So, Wallace, please listen very attentively. There he is. Okay. So, first thing you have to know is about the Townsend Acts. Now, hopefully this should be a review for them, but again, Wallace doesn't know anything about this. So, what the Townsend Acts did is it placed taxes on a lot of the imports that were coming into the colonies. Okay, big deal. Now, the British hoped that these acts might anger the colonists a little less than the Stamp Act did, but that plan didn't really work, and the Townsend Acts really upset the colonists. Now, remember, well, let me tell you all. So in class, what we did is we ranked the acts based on the things that made the colonists the least mad, all the way up to the ones that made them the most mad. If I had done that assignment, I probably would have put the Townsend Acts at the very top because they were the ones that really started a lot of the major boycotts and protests. So after the Townsend Acts, a lot of the colonists really start taking the boycotts seriously. Colonial merchants stop buying or selling British goods. As a result, British profits go way down, which is a problem because if you know about mercantilism, Wallace, it means that the colonists exist to make money for the mother country. They exist to make money for Britain. So right now they're not making money for Britain. They're doing the opposite because they're not buying or selling her goods. Big deal. So anyway, after the Townsend Acts, a big part of the Townsend Acts, almost forgot to mention this, is that now British soldiers had the right to search colonial homes for smuggled goods. And the colonists had already read John Locke and the Enlightenment and everything, which I'm sure you know about, which said that men had these natural rights and liberties that gave them the ability to, not have their privacy infringed. So in this case, a writ of assistance, sort of like a search warrant, but kind of a little more sketchy, meant that the British soldiers could come in and search their homes anytime they wanted. Big deal. So this really, again, is one of the things that's all the way up. We're all the way up at like the top of the scale of stuff that's making the colonists really mad. So anyway, after, the colonists are really angry about the writs of assistance, Samuel Adams, one of the leaders of the Boston Sons of Liberty, continues to encourage the colonists to boycott, to resist British control. And then they start to really take these protests to the next level. So they bring in a ship. The colonists bring in a ship of smuggled wine from one of the other countries in Europe. And the British catch this ship and try to make the colonists, pay a tax for it. Well, this causes riots, and actually the custom officials who were there as representatives from Great Britain had to flee because things were getting so crazy. Hey, Chirk, did you see that? He just left. I was just getting interesting. Whatever. We'll continue without him. I hope you're still listening. So anyway, after this ship is seized, another really big event that happens, which we talked about last time, but I really wanted to cover because it's going to be a really important thing for you to know in the STAR test, is the Boston Massacre. So the Boston Massacre is kind of a result of the Townsend Acts because the British realized that the colonists were starting to do things like smuggle goods. They were starting to really take these boycotts to the next level. So the British saw the need for more control, more direct control coming from the crown. They know they needed it. So in order to control the colonists more, they sent more troops. So in the fall of 1768, 1,000 more British troops arrive in Boston. Now, the reason this is significant is because it really shows the colonists that this level of control they're getting from the British is going to the next sort of extreme, if you will. So tensions are high. People at this point, they're at the very top of that meter of being angry. And a lot of these soldiers, the poor British soldiers who were coming over here, they were very poorly paid. A lot of them didn't really even understand why they were there. They're like, aren't these our colonists? Aren't these like our people? Aren't these technically British citizens? And they got a lot of hate from the colonists. They would call them lobster backs, and they would yell at them, "Lobsters for sale," and just like poke fun at them and, call them names. And in return, these British soldiers would say, you stupid Yankees, and, be telling them making fun of them and calling them names back and forth, which I'm sure you guys never do. But speaking of that, the British soldiers and these colonists who were getting into these little fights are about your age, about 13 and 14 years old. These poor soldiers who are kind of, starting all this drama are about that age. Well, one day, one of these fights was going on. They're yelling at them, back and forth, and a gun goes off. At the end of the day, there were a few colonists who had lost their lives. It's either 4 or 5. I think it was 5. The first person to lose his life was Crispus Attucks, which we mentioned in the last video. And the colonists respond to this in outrage. In fact, they call it the Boston Massacre, okay? Not the Boston accident, not the Boston battle, the Boston Massacre. Remember, the difference between a massacre and a battle is that in a massacre, only one side has weapons. The other side is unarmed. And in a battle, both sides have weapons and are fighting on a pretty equal playing field. Well, so just calling it the Boston Massacre, which the Sons of Liberty sort of marketed it and advertised it as a massacre, sent the colonies in outrage. So in the meantime, the way that other colonists are hearing about what happens is the committees of correspondence. Remember, very important for you to remember, that's something the Sons of Liberty, led by Sam Adams, helped organize so that the colonists could communicate with each other. Now, what's really interesting about the Boston Massacre is the British soldiers who had killed some of the colonists who were there on the harbor were arrested. They were put in prison. And a lot of colonists wanted them executed. But instead, John Adams, who we'll hear a lot about later in the year, he ended up being the second president. Even though he was a patriot, he was sympathetic to the colonial cause, he said, you know what, we need to show Great Britain that we're not just a bunch of hooligans over here in the colonies. We're going to have a trial, and I'm going to defend the British soldiers. Crazy. A lot of the colonists were really upset at John Adams for doing this, but he said, you know what, the law should be deaf to the clamor of the populace, which means the law should give everyone a fair chance. Everyone should have a fair trial. And sure enough, at the end of the trial, the jury decided that the British soldiers had acted in self-defense. And so, to many colonists, however, the Boston Massacre would stand as an example or a symbol of the British tyranny against them. Now, what the colonists didn't know is that on the same day of the Boston Massacre, Parliament proposed the repeal, remember that means to take a law away, of the Townshend Acts. So the Townshend Acts were repealed. A month later, all the acts except the tax on tea was repealed. The colonial boycotts had worked. They worked. The boycotts worked. The British got the message and their trade had been significantly hurt. But Parliament did keep the tax on tea to show that it still had the right to tax the colonists. Kind of like, we still got you. Remember Declaratory Act? We still have power over you. Supreme power. But for a lot of Americans, they saw the repeal of the act. They're like, you know what? This crisis is over. We've finally come to terms. We've agreed with each other. The tax is over. We'll just stay under British control. Hopefully they won't do this again. Sam Adams, however, wanted to make sure people didn't forget this cause of liberty. So he continues this drive, these committees of correspondence in a lot of different towns in Massachusetts. And again, that's to make sure colonial communication is where it needs to be. Because remember, especially when it comes to organizing, starting a revolution, you need to be able to communicate with everyone who could be on your side. Makes you think of like the Hunger Games, how there's all the districts. Imagine if there was only one district fighting against the capital. That would have never worked. They had to mobilize. They had to all come together in order to fight the capital. Anyway, so Parliament, repeals all the Townshend Acts except that one on tea. And they really open up old wounds with this Tea Act, because tea was really popular in the colonies, but most of it was smuggled in from Holland. The Tea Act gave the British East India Company control over the American tea trade. So the tea would arrive in the colonies only in British ships and then be sold there only by British merchants. So colonists who hadn't been paying a tax on tea in a while now had to pay a tax on every, cup of tea they ever drank. So a lot of colonial shippers, a lot of colonial merchants who were making a lot of money off of the smuggled tea were outraged. Just when they thought it was over, it wasn't, because of tea. The colonists wondered, what is Parliament going to do next? What is the next step they're going to take against us if they're even taking away our tea? So the Boston Tea Party occurs as a part of the protest against the Tea Act. Now, we'll go into the details about in just a second, but you have to know the Boston Tea Party wasn't just in Boston. Around the same time in Charleston, South Carolina, the colonists unloaded tea and just let it sit there and rot in the docks, so the British couldn't make any money off of that. In New York City and Philadelphia, colonists literally blocked the tea ships from even being able to land, so they couldn't sell their tea. And then, of course, in Boston, the Sons of Liberty organized what came to be known as the Boston Tea Party. We talked about this last time. Quick review: December 16th, 1773, a group of men disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 tea ships that were docked in Boston Harbor, and they destroyed 342 chests of tea. A lot of colonists rejoiced at the news. They thought that Britain would now see how strongly the colonists react, and then they would see, how much they oppose this taxation without representation, and hopefully this debate would be settled and Britain would finally sort of take the reins off, take the chains off. But a lot of other people doubted that, hey, maybe destroying property isn't the best way to settle this tax debate. Some colonial leaders, like I mentioned last time, even offered to pay for the tea if Parliament would take away or repeal the Tea Act, but Britain rejected this offer. In fact, they not only wanted repayment, but they also wanted the men who destroyed the tea to be brought to trial. The Britain reaction to the Boston Tea Party would continue to fan the flames of rebellion in the 13 colonies. And guys, this is really the last straw, if you will. From this point on in class, we're going to start talking about the steps right before the war and be cutting that string this week. So make sure you took good notes, and I will see you in class next time. Stupid Wallace, you missed